Tonight's topic is a conversation with the Developmental Services Housing Task Force. And we're very lucky to have three members of the Housing Task Force here with us this afternoon. So Leslie O'Reilly has been working in the nonprofit and public housing sectors for over 25 years, including 2 years as a program supervisor in the Ministry of Community and Social Services, Toronto region. He's currently a social housing consultant in the City of Toronto's Social Housing Unit. Bonnie Heath is president of Scarborough Residential Alternatives, which was established in 2006. Scarborough Residential Alternatives are parents of developmentally disabled adults. And because there are almost no funded residential places available for their children, they are examining ways to create their own residential alternatives for lifelong living arrangements. They are determined to successfully create the best possible living arrangements for their children using all resources, government and otherwise, that are available to them. They welcome the participation of any parents or caregivers who find themselves in a similar situation and want to join them in building their children's future. Ron Prusen is the father of 38-year-old Caroline, who is developmentally disabled. He has been active in advocating for improved services for Caroline since the black hole opened in her life beyond the family home when she turned 21 and left school. This initially involved a concern for social, recreational, and educational opportunities, and then soon expanded to include concern for residential programs. What began as a personal family struggle quickly became broader efforts on behalf of thousands of Ontarians like Caroline, early involvement with the Opportunities Mississauga or 21 Plus family group, which represents more than 150 families, has led to participation in the Peel Planning Group, the Developmental Services Partnership Table at Queen's Park, and most recently the Developmental Services Housing Task Force. At the end of the presentations, there's going to be a question and answer period. So I would ask that you write down your questions and keep them for at that time so we can have a nice discussion afterwards. And right now I'm going to pass you on to the Housing Task Force members. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Oh, we even get applause. You get to eat the pizza because we got to talk for a while, but the applause are appreciated. Thank you. It's really good to be here and to see as many people in the audience right in front of us this afternoon, and for others online as well. Welcome to all of you, and really thanks in advance for the opportunity for us to tell you a bit about our work, though I think some of you, many of you, know about it already, or you probably wouldn't be here. But also for us to have an opportunity to hear from you as well, which has been from the beginning of this process an important part of our work. And something, for instance, that Bonnie will touch on in a few minutes. I want to talk just a little bit about where the Housing Task Force came from and some of the things we're doing. Bonnie and Leslie are also going to talk about some of our efforts over the last year, and I guess some of the things that turn into sort of guiding principles or core concerns for us as well. Part of the background, I bet every single one of you in the audience is fully aware of. You know as well as we do that there are thousands, literally thousands, of Ontario adults with developmental disabilities who have been waiting for years and years and years for various kinds of residential and housing opportunities available to them. And many of those thousands of Ontarians have families that are getting older and tireder and are dealing with sometimes some serious or growing health and stress problems of their own. That's where this came from. More specifically, out of of a desire to try to do something about it that didn't seem to be getting done by the government, whose primary responsibility it seemed to be. The Ministry of Community and Social Services partnership table talked for several years, and was probably talking long before I got there, about the housing needs and the fact that the waiting lists were growing longer and longer, and that we were reaching at least what many people who sat on the partnership table called a crisis situation. Ministry doesn't like to use that terminology, but we do. We know it is a crisis. We're living it in many instances. The partnership table formed a housing study group, what began as a housing study group, that issued a report recommending the creation of what, in fancier language initially, we called a capacity building task force. Have a group specifically studying ways to do more than what was being done. We knew we didn't need to define the problem. It was big, and we knew it. It was a crisis, even if not everybody wanted to call it that. The challenge was, what do you do about it? You don't need to keep studying it. You didn't need the old cliche about a royal commission to investigate a problem that we knew perfectly well existed. The issue was what we called at that point an action agenda. How do you take action instead of just measuring the problem? And that's, to the ministry's credit, I think, and Ted McMeekin was the Minister of Community and Social Services at the time. To the ministry's credit, they took that piece of our report from the partnership table and agreed to move to create what's become the Developmental Services Housing Task Force. We were supposed to begin our work a little earlier than it turned out we were able to. There was that minor glitch of the election last year, which delayed our starting. We knew we were coming into existence in, I guess, February, before the election. We didn't actually, because of the election, didn't actually get to meet until September, 1 year ago this month, so September 2014. And we've finished a full year of meeting. We literally met earlier today. Leslie and Bonnie and I came up from our meeting, our first meeting of this year. We gave ourselves July and August off. By and large, there was actually a lot of work that we had to do. We just didn't meet formally. Had our first meeting planning for what's coming up in year 2, and we'll talk about, I'll try to tell you a bit about that in a little while as well. But in year 1, there were some sort of key decisions made. Spent a while getting to know ourselves as members of the committee and getting to share our thoughts about what the priorities were going to be for the housing task force. It has been, I would say, a terrific experience, relatively unique in my life experience in terms of working on these issues, where I would say 90 to 98% of the time I was frustrated and upset and angry, and this has been a very different experience. First of all, because the members of the committee are terrific. There are 16 or 17 of us from very diverse backgrounds. Some of us are absolutely family members dealing with these kinds of issues 24/7. Others, and Leslie is a wonderful example of this, are coming from different sectors, sometimes from agencies, sometimes from municipal governments, but all of us with real interest or concern about the housing crisis confronting Ontario adults with developmental disabilities and their families. And the combination of our shared concern and the diversity of our backgrounds has made it a really interesting experience. I think a very rewarding experience as well. The committee itself, the task force itself, has been wonderful. In this instance, at least, in spite of my earlier years of family experience on this front, the government has been good to work with as well. The ministry has both been cooperative and helpful with respect to creating the task force in the first place, and in terms of making clear their support for what we are doing. They want us to succeed because they know they need help, frankly, in addressing problems that have been waiting far too long for solutions. And I think the commitment is serious. As you may well know from our various announcements and reports, we have a ministry commitment to $3 million of annualized funding for the projects to be recommended and supported or launched by the Housing Task Force at this point, so that we can, I think, make some serious efforts here to come up with innovative proposals. We are the first to argue, and we will be arguing this as long as the Housing Task Force exists, that $3 million is not remotely enough to address the needs that are being lived out there in the wider Ontario community. But it is an effective, impressive start in comparison to what has preceded it. And it's been, I think, for those of us on the task force, rewarding to know that measure of support is there. I mean, you could imagine the potential scenario here that I was afraid of, frankly, last September, which was create the Housing Task Force, tell them to go off and study this problem, and then come to us with a report, maybe at the end of 6 months or at the end of a year, and we'll think about the recommendations you make. I'll confess, I probably would have done that, but I would have been as cynical as I usually have been about what the government is prepared to do. It was a very meaningful surprise to me to find the $3 million put on the table up front in advance. You've got this to work with. Come to us with the recommendations about how to spend this $3 million on creative and innovative approaches to dealing with the long waiting lists with respect to housing and residential needs in the province. So the government has been good to work with. It could be better to work with, and we will continue to push it. It could be a lot better to work with as far as these housing needs are concerned. But there's been, at least to some degree, the signs of a turning of the tide here that's made it a positive experience. Let me tell you a bit about a couple of things about the year one experience for the task force, and ask Bonnie and Leslie to get involved here as well. As I said, some of the things that we spent our time, particularly last fall in our first few meetings, talking about was trying to define the problem as we would see it from our various backgrounds. And in particular, trying to figure out how do we most effectively invest a sum that is both large and yet ultimately limited, like $3 million. And the emphasis has been, and it was really built into the terms of reference for the task force that were announced by the government when they created the task force in the first place. The emphasis for us has had to be on innovative, creative approaches, not the duplication of things that are already being done. That didn't involve, certainly not from my point of view as a member of the task force, involved absolutely no negative judgments about things that were being done. Classic example, group homes. I'll speak for myself here. I have no fundamental critical perspective on group homes at all. I think there are wonderful group homes out there, some wonderful group homes. People are living rich, secure lives as a result of group homes. But they are out there, along with any number of other programs at this point. Conventional supported independent living arrangements are out there and available, and they are wonderful too for various people. But there are lots of people who are either not already being provided services by things like group homes and supported independent living, or who need something different, or an even better term, want something different, and they should have those different opportunities. And so our particular responsibility, our particular focus has been on thinking out of the box. what can we do with $3 million of new money that will be innovative and creative, and start responding to the needs of people whose needs are not being met at this particular point. And secondly, really the twin of this, or the flip side of the coin, to try to find projects, try to help develop projects that can be duplicated, that are, to use the formal terminology, that are demonstration projects, that can show that here you've got an innovative, creative approach that hasn't been used before, but that can not only work for a particular group of individuals in a particular community right now at the beginning, but can then be duplicated elsewhere when it shows that it really will work in a creative and innovative and effective way, can be duplicated around the province and meet some of the needs that exist clearly in virtually every community across the province. So those have been two key concerns for us. Our approach to dealing with that, to trying to get a handle on that and actually develop an action agenda as well as a concept here, was what many of you know is what was called the expression of interest process, the EOI process that was launched back in the late winter and early spring, where we invited proposals, created a set of guidelines, invited proposals for review by the Housing Task Force, and then recommendation to the ministry for funding. The funding itself, formal funding decisions are done by the ministry. It's government resources. We are an arm's length organization as the Housing Task Force, so the actual commitment of funds had to come from the ministry. But that has gone extremely smoothly. I'll start at the tail end of that story and then back up a couple of steps. The Housing Task Force recommended 12 proposals for funding. All 12 were approved by the ministry. We were a little nervous about what would happen to the Housing Task Force recommendations. You know, would the ministry decide to jiggle them around in some way? They didn't. They took our recommendations, funded every one of them. And that was another measure, I think, of the ministry's efforts to really be genuinely cooperative and helpful here in moving forward as far as this situation is concerned. To back up a couple of steps, we had 80 proposals submitted for the first round of what would be a two-round process. 80 proposals. The amount of funding that was asked for, if you combine all 80 proposals, was $26 million. A little more than the $3 million we had to work with. $26 million for the 80 proposals. The 12 proposals that wound up being approved use a little bit more than half of the $3 million of annualized funding. Will wind up serving, I think, approximately 60 to 65 individuals for a cost, roughly speaking, on an individual basis of roughly half of what the traditional group home support costs are at this point. I'm not particularly driven by the per capita cost here. I'm just mentioning it as a piece of information. Sometimes it seems to me, frequently it seems to me, it's important to spend more money when more money is needed. I'm not looking for the cheapest, personally, I'm not looking for the cheapest way of doing something. But if something really good and valuable can be done for less money, that's great, because it may open up other doors to expand the number of people who are receiving services. So 80 proposals, $26 million in total requests, 12 of those proposals going forward. And in the second round of the process, a new round of requests for proposals, and that'll be announced before the end of the year with the application process, et cetera. The full $3 million will be committed. Frankly, and I'll speak for myself personally, though I doubt that anybody on the task force will disagree with this, we're fully expecting that we're also going to be continually pressing the ministry for more than $3 million, because one of the things that clearly impressed us us in reviewing those 80 proposals is how many really good ideas are out there. There are some terrific proposals. We would have absolutely recommended funding more than 12 of those 80 if we'd had more money to work with. There are some great proposals, great ideas out there, and we are constantly sort of zigzagging back and forth between a level of satisfaction about being able to do something, but frustration about not being able to do as much as it would be highly desirable to do, particularly when there are so many great proposals that are taking shape. And frankly, with even more time for groups and families to plan, we're assuming there'll be even more great ideas in the second round of the proposal process. So that was a key step for us in the first year of operation. Defining what our priorities were, getting a commitment to concrete and annualized ongoing funding from the ministry at this point, and then setting up this expression of interest process in order to tap what I think are very obviously creative juices and energies out in the broader community. Very few of you, particularly if you're a family member, will be surprised that there are really great ideas beyond Queen's Park. And I think we're proving that. We've known it, and we're proving it yet again through the process that we're undertaking at this point. That part of the task force's work in the first year, very much, and the very nature of this expression of interest process of inviting proposals, was connected with what for us was a related priority of wanting to communicate as much as possible. Although we meet at Queen's Park, virtually all of us are from elsewhere in the province, some further away or closer. I'm from Mississauga, myself, Bonnie from Scarborough. Yeah, okay, you're from Toronto. But we've got people from quite distant, certainly Ottawa, Windsor, Thunder Bay and Sudbury and the like represented in the task force. So we meet at Queen's Park, but it's been a real concern on our part to engage as much as possible with the wider community, both to get concrete ideas, the proposals, but a continual input of ideas, expressions of concern, stories, life stories and experiences that will help shape the work that we do and the priorities that we set for ourselves. Bonnie has been particularly involved in helping us do that as this first year of our work unfolded. And why don't I ask her to tell you a bit about some of what she's been involved with, just as an example, though I think by definition most of you sitting here this afternoon know some of this, but why don't you put it into a little more context as well.
Okay, so right at the beginning, when we started the task force, we set up a communications committee so that our concern is getting the word out to as many families and individuals as possible. And we are an Ontario task force, so we've got a lot of area to cover. So the first thing we did was set up a Facebook page so that we could post anything that the ministry announced or the expressions of interest, all that kind of stuff, but also as a forum for families to connect with each other, because it's a huge area and different places have done things differently. So we set up the Facebook page, and that's a very active page. There's 613 members, I believe, at the moment. And so people will put out, like, I've done this, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this part, and they'll get answers. Or so that's been a very effective forum for us. We also have an email account that we set up so that some people don't like Facebook. So
for some of us don't know how to use it.
Yeah. So a lot of people do know how to use email. So sorry.
Even I.
Yes. So we set up the email, and that gets answered as well. And periodically we do send out some of the conversation that's been on Facebook so that they can be kind of connected with the two. And we've also partnered with Connectability. We have a section on the housing unit of Connectability that is for the Housing Task Force. So we also put the expression of interest out there. Any comments that the ministry has sent out, the proposals that were approved, they are on that site as well. And on the site, it does have the email account plus the Facebook connection, so you can click on for them. And the reason why we chose Connectability is one, it was up and running, and so if we had have set up our own website, probably 2 years from now it would have been set up, and then we would close and then there'd be nothing on it, right? So this way it's up running and it's a permanent thing. So all the information that we gather, we put up there. We're constantly contacting other agencies, other groups, to find out what they've done, what papers they've written, so that we can also put that on there as well, so that families and agencies can look on there and say, okay, this has been done, but it won't kind of work exactly that way with us. We'll add our little tweaks to it and switch it around. So that's the way we've gotten quite a bit of conversation going and getting people connected, because it's awful if you don't find out about something until after the due date, and then you go, well, great. So that's where we've gone with that.
Good. Okay. One of the other variation on the communication process that was also very clear already in year one, and it's going to become even more so in year two for us, has been communication in other directions as well. That is, the types of things that Bonnie was just talking about involved our desire to communicate with other people in the province who were dealing with these issues, who, because of family needs or organizational connections and responsibilities, knew about the housing problems or crisis confronting people with developmental disabilities and their families, that we would be able to talk to. So we'd be able to tell them things that we were doing, but they'd be able to talk to us as well and give us ideas. But we were also anxious to get beyond that community at this point. And we saw, for us, a key objective being to, in a sense, broaden the conversation. And a key example of that for us to this point has been to put some emphasis on what we would call loosely interministerial cooperation, or involvement with other levels of government as well, with municipalities, with regional authorities and administrators, for instance, and with other ministries at Queen's Park, with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, for instance, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Education. One of our shared convictions, I think, at the start of the work of the Housing Task Force was that, and you've all, I'm sure, heard about the problem and have vented about it any number of times, these silos that exist at Queen's Park. You know, why don't the people at the Ministry of Health work with the people at Community and Social Services to deal with some of the housing needs of adults with developmental disabilities who frequently have a health issue as well as a so-called developmental disability issue? Shouldn't the other ministries be carrying their share of the responsibility for meeting the housing needs that are out there? And we've already started working, I think, on this and are moving more energetically forward. Let me turn to Leslie to give you one example of an opportunity that we took advantage of that specifically involved the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And obviously, the very name of the ministry suggests how appropriate it is to make sure that they're part of the conversations we want to have about the thousands of people with developmental disabilities waiting for housing supports and opportunities. Leslie?
Oh, thanks, Ron. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing pretty well delivers all the housing funding for the province. They recently had a consultation on their long-term affordable housing strategy, and they were inviting comments from across the province. So as the task force recognized that we could perhaps try to influence their decision-making, provide them with some information based on what we saw and the comments we received, some on connectability and through Facebook, on what they could do to enhance housing for people with developmental disabilities, create more opportunities for them. I think the document was handed out. We submitted it, but we also made it public because we felt that we had a number of strong points to make, that perhaps the different areas of government weren't coordinating enough that could benefit the community. To give you a couple of examples, housing is again delivered from the Municipal Affairs and Housing, and it's pretty well downloaded to each municipality to deliver. And there's an assumption there that each municipality will decide where the priorities are. Not many of the municipalities that we canvassed actually recognized that people with developmental disabilities were a priority group. And in fact, most municipalities believe that it was the complete responsibility of the Ministry of Community and Social Services. So that if a municipality received a call and said, we're aware that a family would call up and say, we're aware that that your municipality or my counselor, that there's money for housing, and my child or my adult son or daughter requires assistance, pretty well the municipality would say, okay, here's the number for MCSS, go give them a call, I'm sure they're going to take care of it. Well, the reality is that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing did not actually allocate money over to MCSS to deliver this, and MCSS has a lot of money for support, but not a tremendous amount of money for housing. So our recommendation, the first recommendation on here was something that they did with the urban Aboriginal community in the province. They recognized that that they best know their community, and they actually took some money away. Instead of sending it down to the municipalities for them to deliver, they gave it to the urban Aboriginal community and said, okay, you actually deliver the housing and you identify the needs. So our recommendation here was that they should do the same here and actually take a chunk, not give it to the municipalities, but deliver it to the community family table, the community planning tables.
Community planning tables, yeah.
Community planning tables within MCSS, and that those community planning tables best know how to address the priorities of people with developmental disabilities. So not to leave it to the municipalities to address that issue, but to actually hive off a chunk to provide to the community planning tables. That was one example. There are other smaller examples that we put in. You can read it in the report. Many families have support but not housing, have housing but not support. From the housing side, which we were trying to address, there's a basic ODSP shelter amount that doesn't come anywhere near the value of any real accommodation, and our recommendation there was a simple one: increase the shelter value to the market value within each community. In Toronto, it's very expensive for even shared housing. In Kenora, it's a little bit less expensive. There's no reason with technology that they couldn't figure out what the CMHC, Community Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, has an average market rent for each community. They could easily bring that, well, it's easy to say, but our recommendation was that they take the ODSP shelter amounts up to what the market is for each community. That way you wouldn't have to fight. I mean, most people with developmental disabilities, if not all, are receiving ODSP, and they get, what's the 479 is the maximum?
Yep.
Why would you put it there when the cost of housing is here? So we said some fairly obvious things in here. We suggested that affordable housing should be geared to those and reserved for those who actually require it. We think that if you get into affordable housing, your income should be benefit tested, that if your income increases, you should no longer get the benefit. Use that benefit for other people and hive off a piece for people who need it. So it's in the report. We, notwithstanding what Ron said at the beginning, that we didn't just want to create reports. We do sometimes want to create reports. We want to try to influence where we can, and we thought it was an opportunity for the Housing Task Force to open the eyes, perhaps, of the ministries. They know these issues are out there. They've actually come back and said that the stuff that we recommended was recommended by many other people as well. But it's important to have our voice heard there as well, and your voice. And that's what we tried to do.
I like that point about opening eyes, because one of the things we've heard as we've begun discussions across ministries and across levels of government is that for people who have not traditionally, people with government responsibilities who've not traditionally thought about people with developmental disabilities, there's been usually a fairly welcoming response. So far, we'll see what action comes of it, but which says, we didn't think of this in connection with our particular need. The province's poverty reduction strategy program, for instance, at this point, our initial discussions with the people involved at that, and that's based at the Treasury Board, was, we hadn't thought about the way in which people with developmental disabilities were poor, were living in poverty, even though technically they were living on ODSP amounts, which is pretty well, perfectly well, going to put you in poverty. So they didn't quite get it. And they weren't resistant to the notion of thinking about it. It's just somebody needed to kind of put it in front of them and make them pay attention to it. Now, a key test is going to be going forward. What does the awareness and the paying attention translate into in terms of actions? But the opening wedge part of the process, at least, has been making them aware of it. And this was, from our point of view, a terrific opportunity to engage municipal affairs and housing in some really crucial issues for going forward.
Identifying disconnects.
Yes, exactly.
Connectability, this is the...
That's right. It's the other end of the spectrum.
Yep.
That's right.
Between what
we want to bring them together.
Assumptions and what is actually being delivered out there.
Thanks. Anyway, just a couple of words about the year 2 plans, and then trying to maximize opportunity for questions and to hear from you as well. As I said, we met for the first time this fall, earlier today. On one hand, we're moving along a familiar track. We do have the second round of the expression of interest process coming up. The announcement and the guidelines, the application form, and so forth will be out there before the end of the year. And our desire absolutely is to have the next set of recommendations going to the ministry before the end of this current fiscal year, which will be March 31st, 2016. So that's on track. We knew it was coming. We confirmed the plan and the intentions at the meeting today. We also have decided, because of all the communication efforts last year, because of the nature of the proposals that came in the first round of the EOI process, we were able to identify what we see as some crucial issues or themes that we want to look at in a more intensive way in this coming year. And at the moment, for instance, what we are envisioning is creating a number of subcommittees within the Housing Task Force to more intensively study specific issues. And we've got several of them identified. The list isn't complete, will almost surely grow over the next month by the time we meet in October. On one hand, for instance, we know we're going to create a subcommittee for intensive work on supports questions. How can we think more creatively than we've been thinking about finding necessary support dollars, about getting beyond using the serious resources that the government will have to continue to commit to these needs. Nobody's blind to that absolute necessity. But how can we supplement those? How can we leverage those by tapping the resources available in the wider community, on the part of families, on the part of local communities, churches, service clubs, local businesses, and the like. How can we mobilize, and other ministries, how can we mobilize additional resources to expand the support dollars that are available, which may be the single most serious stumbling block for addressing the housing needs of adults with developmental disabilities. Where do the support dollars come from? That said, we also want to organize or have begun organizing a subcommittee to deal with capital needs, the bricks and mortar costs. How can we think more creatively about those kinds of opportunities? And, involving, for instance, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing is one example of that, but there are others that are worth exploring as well. Also want to look at, and we've talked about creating a subcommittee that will deal with rent subsidies. How do we effectively harness the potential of rent subsidies to help address housing needs? And a fourth example, just for the moment, and I repeat, these are not by any means, this is not a complete list by any means, is we want to think more creatively about technology and the ways in which all kinds of new technologies can make a difference in terms of what is required for housing services and supports for adults with developmental disabilities. Everything from very imaginative and creative smart house technologies to other forms of communication, opportunities to keep in touch with people who are receiving housing supports, who do not necessarily require 24/7 or overnight support, but who need something more than a supported independent living arrangement where somebody comes in for 3 hours a week. Technology can be extremely helpful for those various parts of the spectrum. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'd come back to it. And even in some early conversations with those of you in the audience before we began our formal talk here, one of the things that's very clear, I think, to the Housing Task Force is how diverse the community is. There are so many different kinds of needs out there, and one of the serious problems confronting the community, one of the reasons why the waiting lists are so long, is that a range of services and supports has not been as diverse. We've had a couple of cookie cutters available, and if you don't find one of those useful, you're out of luck at this point. That's got to change. And technology is one of the things that can probably help us change on that front. So those are a few of the things that we see as high priorities for the months ahead of us here in year 2 of the Housing Task Force. I just wrap up this, but needless to say, lots of time for questions and conversation with you at this point. Again, I think speaking for myself, but I suspect not only myself, I find myself beginning year 2 with a kind of combination of almost opposite sensations and and emotions. On one hand, I still feel profound frustration, as many of you do, about where we are and how far we have to go as far as these needs are concerned. But that really is, for me at least at this point, counterpointed by a level of optimism that we really are moving, at least moving in the right direction, moving at all at this point. And what I'd like to see happen from my point of view over the next year is keep moving and even pick up the pace at this point. This is so enormous a set of problems. We are not going to solve it in 2 or 3 years of work by a housing task force, but we can make a difference, and that'll be a lot better than anything that has happened for a long time, I think. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Now we're opening up for questions. What I would ask is, if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll point to you. And if you could speak really clearly. And I would ask the three of you that with a question, if you could repeat the question, just to make sure that
I get it. And all the 24 people online get it.
yes. So it's heard because sometimes in an audience we don't have a microphone to hand around. But so if you could repeat the question, and then we know that it's clear and everyone understands.
Okay.
So any questions? Yes.
I have 2 questions actually. The first one has to do with the feedback from the initial proposals.
Okay.
Is the intention for that feedback to come back to people who've made submissions in a timely enough fashion so that if they want to resubmit again, that would be possible?
Okay. Quick answer to that. The question was about feedback for those whose proposals were not recommended in the first round. And yes, the commitment was made. If feedback was requested, it would be provided. We had an update report on this whole process this morning. There are individualized feedback letters being prepared. They will be sent to all of those who've requested feedback before the end of September, and that will be in plenty of time to be taken into account for the second round. Absolutely. Yeah. For us, that was an important example of the communication process here, to make sure that people heard from us about this. Yeah.
Second question.
And the second question, has the task force looked at the transitional housing needs over the lifetime of individuals? So, for example, a young person in their 20s and into their 30s would have a different need than in their 40s and 50s, and then in becoming senior citizens. And that's also part of the struggle for families, is looking at how they can help plan not only for the immediate future, but also for transitioning aging, because they will be there by the time their son or daughter.
Another transition is needed. Yeah. Bonnie, do you want to?
All right, so the question was about different types of housings for the transition of a person's lifetime. So in some of the proposals, there's one group that is for the aging population to address their needs. And there are some that are young people that are going into first-time housing. So we are trying to get a full spectrum of projects that will address these different needs, because, as you say, we won't be there at the end of it, and knowing what's available. It's a fairly new field for our sector, because a lot of people didn't live till an older age, right? So it's an up-and-coming situation, and so we have addressed it in one of the proposals, and don't know what's coming up in the second round, right?
Thank you. I've been following your work and reading everything and your connectability and reports. And I have 2 kind of a question and a comment. One is the primary essence for me is the issue of security of tenure. that whatever solutions we come up with are long-lasting and durable. And rental arrangements typically are not. So I want to just highlight whatever solutions we come up with that, and people often lose their security of housing because of behavioral issues or lack of supports, okay? That, for me, an important component of many choices, is security of tenure, and that might mean home ownership or collective ownership, so people know that that's a place that has permanency, okay? The second thing is, I've always had a worry and concern about how we say we want to think out of the box, and oftentimes we get stuck right back in it. I'm very concerned about, my approach to these things is let's normalize the topic. There's a tendency to always call it the handicap issue. It's really a housing issue with needs for additional supports. And I disagree wholeheartedly with the idea of removing responsibility for incorporating our needs into the planning of local housing and municipal housing authorities. I think our job should be to encourage them to be sensitive to that community, make it a priority, and every municipal housing manager has to every year have a plan as to how they're going to meet the housing needs of people in their community. So what I like to see more of, and I was disappointed, frankly, with some of the choices in year 12, is the attempt to try and link with existing systems. So Ministry of Housing should be on the hook for some of this. I'm not prepared to say it's just the Ministry of Community and Social Services thing. And likewise, Ministry of Health for the support component. The more we move away from the strictly welfare model, which is what's limiting us. I mean, we've got how many pages here talking about ODSP, housing subsidy issues and restrictions, because we're using the welfare model, okay? And we're still charging people sizable amounts of their ODSP check for the housing choices they do make. So I really want to encourage you to really, and you've mentioned this in year 2, look at really effectively activating the other ministries to come to the table. There's lots that can be done, and I'm always stuck with how other sectors are making real moves and changes in the housing arena. And you're yourself, sir, at City of Toronto, have seen some of that. We need to be at those tables, and we need to encourage that Ministry of Housing can and should make priority for our group and community, and likewise for Ministry of Housing and other related ministries. So I would say I'm not happy with leaving it in the hands of the planning tables. I think people should be able to access these needs and services without having to use a professional model of welfare, administration for housing. And I would really, really encourage that you open up that box a little and bring other people to the table. We're taxpayers; they have a responsibility to us as well.
Sure. I really can't repeat all of that. But I summarize it at least by saying it involves how do we find the most effective mechanisms to access supports from, in this case, from Municipal Affairs and Housing and/or Health for housing needs without having to continue relying virtually exclusively on community and social services at this point. Do you want to work with that a bit? Go ahead.
And moving away from the welfare model of looking at this issue,
right?
Because it isn't an issue of welfare.
Some of the issues are related to education, I think, of municipalities. Some municipalities recognize.
That's our job.
Yeah, some of the municipalities actually do a good job of recognizing that people with developmental disabilities need a piece of the pie, and they do it. Some don't, and as I said, and we reported in our submission, some completely believe that the Ministry of Community and Social Services has the sole responsibility. The idea of hiving off a piece similar to the urban native was to get beyond that, but you're right, that you could certainly...
You won't get institutional change if you continually remove the responsibility from them.
Right, so you could educate the municipalities that there is a need, but the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing could also identify targets to the municipality. You must deliver X percentage to this community. You can do it many ways. Our intent, and I think you captured it, was that the DS community is not being served by the municipalities right now because there's an assumption that it's being served elsewhere. Well, it's not being served elsewhere.
But the solution isn't to make your first recommendation that it should be served elsewhere. Right? The first recommendation should be they should be serving. And whether we as community people, parents, advocates, or you as a task force, part of our job is to educate municipal officials and elected officials that this is a housing issue, right? Not just a welfare issue. And it's all incumbent upon all of us to push that box open a little more and force some of those linkages into ministerial linkages, which will work once you start working on it.
Well, and I wind up repeating myself, so I won't do it at any length. But for us, a key priority, and we identified it at the beginning, particularly intensive work will take place this year, is on developing exactly that kind of interministerial collaboration on this. They've been avoiding it for decades, frankly, and it can't continue. If we really want to solve these problems, it cannot continue. There are serious resources to be tapped, and it's just conceptually and philosophically and ethically, it's the right thing to do anyway. Yeah.
And hopefully in phase 2, you'll fund a group that will do just that.
Well, there are one of the proposals being, well, more than one of the proposals actually being recommended, certainly already involved cooperation within a local community of a demonstration project that involved cooperation from the Ministry of Health, for instance, as well as local planning authorities and like. I don't have the list precisely with me, but that was very much an objective on our part. Show how this can be done. And you had, within a particular community, the organization of efforts to do exactly that. And our feeling was, go for it. This is exactly the kind of thing that is worth showing and then can be duplicated elsewhere in the province. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, we have some questions online.
Mr. President, there's 24 people outside of this room paying attention and wanting to ask questions. So the first question is, someone who submitted a proposal for round 1 and was not approved, and they're saying if they submit their questions for feedback by the start of next week, should they expect a 4 to 6 week reply? And how much time will that be then to revamp their proposal for the next round?
Okay, so I think what is being prepared at this point are feedback letters and communications to all of those who have requested feedback.
If they have not requested feedback?
If they have not requested it, they should request it. But at this point, I don't think the Housing Task Force has the ability to start responding to very specific questions. I think if there's a request for feedback, we will provide some feedback with respect to the review of the proposal. But I think given 80 proposals, given the number that were not funded, the ability of what is a volunteer group, after all, to start responding to very specific questions, I don't think we can go down that road, I think, from a practical point of view. But I don't think it's too late to request feedback.
So requesting feedback early next week should put them in time for
submission. And getting the feedback that's being prepared. Exactly.
Okay, awesome. That's question number 1. So another question. Hi folks, I'm here with a couple of parents that have a question. They would like to know if half of the funding is spent providing housing to the 65 individuals, or please clarify what that means.
It means that 65 individuals who are on waiting lists at this point, who are not receiving services, from this point forward will, at some point in the months immediately ahead, will start receiving housing supports. The range of those supports, and this brings us back to the diversity of needs within the community, the range can be quite different. But 65 people who've not been receiving supports will start receiving supports at this point.
Will that support continue into the future?
I'm glad you brought that up, because this came back to the first point you were making, where I think security of tenure for us in all kinds of ways is an important issue as well. And for us, an important initial achievement, frankly, within the Housing Task Force, I would say, was the ability to get an annualized commitment from the ministry for this. The initial thought was, okay, you have $3 million to do something with for this 2-year period. And then for many of us, because we've lived this life, the question was, yeah, okay, and then what happens at the end of 2 years? And I think because it's annualized funding, although there will be and there should be a reporting and a review and an assessment process for these initiatives and projects. The ability to go on funding those projects beyond the 2-year initial period exists, so that there is a security of support in that sense. One of our initial concerns was, as a family, do you want to sort of float a proposal, do all the work required to craft a proposal, find out, you won the lottery, so to speak, and okay, you've got this, but you only have it for 2 years. And then find out you get thrown back to square one again. And we were very concerned about that. And the annualized commitment for the $3 million holds out the strong possibility of ongoing funding with review, assessment, et cetera. It's also one of the reasons why we strongly will be pushing and pushing and pushing for more than $3 million. It's like many of those, if not every one of those ongoing projects deserves ongoing support beyond 2 years. But then, of course, there's still thousands of other people waiting for support. So,
last question of this round, anyway. The task force, I'm going to read this verbatim because it's quite long. The task force decided not to duplicate existing approaches, but I imagine that was targeted to existing forms, such as group homes. But why wouldn't the task force be prepared to support existing work that is innovative and did not wait for this task force to develop and implement? It's actually much more efficient to support proven solutions and grow their capacity than to constantly ask for something that is innovative, when that word is used to mean doesn't exist. If it already works and it can be proven to work well, why not fund increased capacity for proven effective solutions?
Okay. It's an issue that we grappled with, and part of the grappling was required by the way in which an awful lot of the discussion about existing services zeroes in too narrowly, ultimately, but zeroes in out of convenience on group homes and supported independent living arrangements. Those seem to be the only models of existing service that are out there, and they're not. There are absolutely legitimate to say there are other kinds of services that have become innovative, have been developed particularly in more recent years. And in the same way that I would not, have any kind of blanket criticism of either group homes or supported independent living, the fact remains that these are things already being done, and they may be extremely good, and they may be innovative. They may have started out as innovative programs, and they're there. And I would argue they absolutely deserve support and duplication. That's not the nature of this particular process. The expression of interest, because we have a limited amount of money to spend, had to be on now innovative, newly innovative programs. And that's disappointing for all kinds of groups and communities. It's disappointing for many people who believe with great sincerity and perhaps wisdom that they need 3 more group homes in their community, or they need 50 more supported independent living opportunities. It's the same kind of disappointment that would be there. Absolutely understand that, absolutely believe in the desirability of additional supports. But this particular slice of $3 million was designed to open yet some other windows on the future.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there some way that the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs can apply a pressure to local municipalities to be flexible to creative, innovative housing options, so that it's just, we can't do this because of this bylaw, that one, and
We have.
Oh yeah, you got to deal with this.
We've made those recommendations. Certainly, the ministry asked for input on those very questions. They're looking, and they had, I think, 5 or 6 different areas, or maybe 4, I forget, areas to focus in on. And some of it was legislative changes. Some of it is inclusionary zoning. We had a recommendation on harmonizing zoning for secondary suites. Some municipalities allow it, some don't. Even within the city of Toronto itself, there are different rules around rooming houses. Some areas of the city allow it, and the city of Toronto is currently harmonizing those rules. So there is, and it's a massive amount of information that they received, and they're going to go through it, but like any political body, I assume that they respond to political pressure. As you said, that it's our role as the community of developmental services to look out for the area that we advocate for. I think Ron said it in the introduction that there are many needs out there, but we can't advocate for all the needs. Our role here is to advocate for this community. And you're right, the ministry can make some changes. I mean, they can identify specific areas of funding that you should provide to this area or this area, or they could harmonize legislation or other rules such as inclusionary zoning, where a developer exceeds the zoning rights and they have to give back something to the city. Well, the city can hive off different areas of that and serve specific communities. There are many things, but they will respond, and I think it's important to address this with your MPP and continue to do that. I mean, you have these ideas, you can get involved and find out how you can apply some influence on their decision making.
It's also just an extra little wrinkle in that process. I don't think I'm being unreasonably unrealistic in this. It does seem to me it's one of those areas when you talk about things like zoning regulations and the variations across the realm. We have a real issue with this in Mississauga, for instance, which has been, extremely unhelpful as far as zoning regulations for, things like at least small-scale group homes at this point. It is something that the provincial government can do that involves no dollars, and it may make it easier for if they think of it, if they realize the potential, they don't have to find the money to make it happen. In this case, they need to find a lot of money anyway, granted, but there are certain things that don't necessarily have dollar costs attached to them that will still make a difference as far as meeting some of these housing needs are concerned.
Just repeat the question.
Yes, forgive me if my terminology is kind of naive, but are you saying that the only thing that we as individuals can do to bring about what I suppose in the end would have to be legislative change is knock on the door of your MPP?
No, good question. Yes, the question was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are we limited by knocking on the door of our MPP to try to create legislative change? Well, that's one role. Advocacy bodies I think we find ourselves a dual role. We are looking at housing solutions, but we're also an advocacy group, and we continue from the inside to knock heavily on the door of not just the Ministry of Community and Social Services, but we have representation there from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we push. You belong to advocacy groups as well. You must push as well from the outside. But I can't imagine what the limitations are for you going forward. But contacting your MPP is one solution. I wasn't suggesting that is your only solution.
I'm picking up on what Brenda said, I think. And I'm thinking in the end, it's very nice to open people's eyes ethically and to make them say, hey, this is a group that we ought to be thinking about. But ultimately, doesn't there have to be legislation which forces them to do this? No.
I would say, personally, I would say no. We have on the books now, rent subsidies, purchase subsidies. You don't need legislative changes for that.
To do that.
Ministry of Housing pays for attendant care services for people with physical disabilities. There's no reason why the Ministry of Health can pay for attendant care services for people with developmental disabilities. It's just a scratch of the paper. That is not legislative. And that's why I think we got to think out of the box, because we have existing mechanisms we're not even touching. And the inclusionary zoning, I mean, as we speak, deals are being made every time a condo is being built, that they have to give back so many units to the city, either in terms of rent subsidy units or easy to purchase units. There's no reason why we can't be at those tables and say that let us consider us as part of the community. And none of that is legislative. It's already there. We just got to put it together. And give suggestions to make it known and easy for them, but frankly, they'll have no choice. And Mississauga and Peel used to use rent subsidies very effectively for some of the independent housing situations that they were developing. And that was the existing program that was around at the time. There's no need for new legislation.
Well, the reality of municipalities is they face a tremendous pressure for dollars. I mean, they do, and they address what is in front of them often, and it's political. And often, if they don't see it, or if they can rationalize that developmental services is taken care of by MCSS, so they don't give them that number. It's not us. We're dealing with homelessness.
Well, and when your number one project for $1 million was for homeless.
That's right.
I don't remember the last time our issues dealt with homeless disability. I know there are people who are disabled who are homeless, but I don't know if that was the number one priority issue for our community in terms of our needs, but that seemed to get the bulk of the dollars, $1 million. Who speaks loudest gets the money.
I'm going to go off in another direction. There's a lot of emphasis on looking for intergovernmental cooperation as you're evaluating the proposals. But there's another whole sector out there. There's the private sector. And if the private sector can be engaged in some of these innovative processes, or even thinking about what the innovations might be, would that not be a significant step forward? So I'd just like to have comments from you on whether those kinds of partnerships are at a premium, or are they valued at a premium, or not?
So the question is involvement by the private sector when we've had a good deal of emphasis clearly in both the discussion and the proposals that have emerged on various types of government funding and involvement, and or government and family or local organization and agency cooperation. And on one hand, where we are at the moment is a function of what ideas are coming in, where the there would have been very limited emphasis on involvement by the private sector at this point. On the other hand, in terms of going forward, so that we were responding to proposals that came to us for innovative, creative solutions. And if those proposals did not put an emphasis on or incorporate private sector involvement, that would be, would give us less to work with potentially. But going forward, I think, for instance, what I was talking about a little earlier about the year 2 priorities concerning figuring out ways to leverage resources absolutely involves potential for private sector involvement. In particular, not only families, church communities, service clubs and the like, but local businesses as well, potentially within respective communities. I think it's the sort of thing that is likeliest to happen. I can't predict this, but I think it's likeliest to happen a case at a time, community by community, where somebody figures out a way to put the pieces together, including the private sector pieces. And I think that's something as a task force that we would love to see. Mm-hmm. And we will do our part to try to encourage the conversations within local communities, or if it makes sense across the province to do it that way, to see that happen. Because I completely see the logic of saying, that's an incredibly valuable potential resource. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
To add to her point, I think, when it comes to education and employment too, real work, finding real work, people that can work and not have to rely on welfare or ESPs. And I think that's another direction we have to emphasize again, because we're starting to see a little bit of movement there, but I think that's where some answers lie. It's just let's get them educated and employed.
I think that's a great point. The observation about the value of thinking about work and employment in this process, and maybe perhaps the most crucial place in which private sector engagement can play a role here. That is, we don't have to think of a two-step dance here in which, how can we get the private sector to contribute to housing supports in some direct way by saying, okay, business X, Y, or Z, give us $1 million so that we can create an endowment that will help provide the support needs. That would be pretty damn good. No complaints if that was going to happen. But maybe the more realistic scenario is involvement by the private sector on the employment front that will actually give people who need the housing opportunities the resources to work with themselves. That makes a lot of sense. I agree.
There was
I'd like to throw one addendum in there. The profit motive is not one that we talk about a whole lot in the developmental service sector, but indeed, there's money to be made by creating things that will be used perhaps by people with developmental disabilities, but also possibly by another whole range of people. And that's where I think that it's equally important to sort of engage that profit motive.
Sure.
To some extent in looking for these leverages. Yeah. Why not?
Why not, indeed.
I was just going to say, in response to the employment, that's not our area, but last fall, the ministry did put out a call for proposals on employment funding and how to get people employed. So they are looking at that as well. Obviously that's not where we're at, but it's part of the whole package.
And it does become, just to add to that and circle back to your point, it isn't officially a component of our mandate as a housing task force, but it would not be unreasonable for us to say this is important to housing in the long run. And again, I would absolutely want to come back to continual need to emphasize the diversity that exists within the community here. We can talk about gainful employment opportunities opportunities for many people with developmental disabilities. But we all know perfectly well that that's not going to be true for many others as well. So this isn't the magic bullet here that we found to solve this problem, but it is a tool that has potential value and is underdeveloped at this point. Absolutely, yeah.
I find it interesting that we're talking about some of the ministries working together, and I have a document that was developed in the early 1980s where all the ministries, federal, provincial, and territorial, they produced this document in unison, and they agreed that all these ministries were going to work together to meet the needs of individuals with developmental disabilities. It's not just NCSS, it's not just housing, it's health, it's every ministry there is. We're supposed to be looking after the residents
who signed on. Yeah.
Right, they didn't ask to have disabilities, so I mean, all the ministries are responsible. Silos. But I have that document, I remembered it so well, and I couldn't remember the name of it, but yeah. And that was back in the early, I think it was 81 or 82. And here we are, 2015.
Still talking
now we're
about
talking about ministries working together again.
Some things change, and some things go in circles, and some things never change. Yeah.
I was very optimism suddenly grew when I heard about housing task force. Just two things. Co-op housing, is it built at all in present times?
Are there new
co-op housing?
New co-op housing.
This model would be more suitable for people with disability to be in co-op.
So the question was, are there any cooperative housing developments being developed now?
Yes.
It hasn't happened in Ontario for quite some time. There hasn't been a housing program like that since, I guess, 1995, I believe. When the provincial government cancelled, both the national and the provincial government got out of housing. The housing development that comes now is through the investment in affordable housing. It's a federal provincial program, and it is again delivered by the municipalities. Affordable housing is created through that. It's also known as below market housing, and it's for people who can afford 80% approximately of the average market rent in any community. So it's for the working poor. But none of it, as far as I know, is cooperative in nature. It's not, there haven't been allocations that have been given to co-ops. It could have happened throughout the province. I'm not aware of any, but again, I'm not with the province, I'm with the city of Toronto.
Private sector, when you say private sector involvement, what about the developers? What about all those cranes and how about to get a little share? Then to be responsible to give.
Well, that's inclusionary zoning, and the city actually does not have the right to do that right now. It's a provincial legislation that has to be passed, and I believe that the city would be aggressive to require that. There have been examples. I attended an inclusionary zoning session, and Daniels Corporation, who's developing Regent Park, a very large developer, publicly said that they would be all for inclusionary zoning and would give back to the community, but it would have to be a level playing field where every developer would be required to do that. And for them to come out and do it themselves puts them at a competitive disadvantage with all the other developers. So we would need the provincial government to allow the municipalities to say, okay, if you're going to develop, you got to give us back this chunk. And And I think someone at that session said if we had inclusionary zoning for the last 10 years, we would have created, I think, something like 30,000 affordable housing units over the last 10 years. Because you're right, all the cranes going up in the city, you see them all the time. Well, some of that profit could have been distributed, but the city of Toronto does not have that legislative right to require all developers to do that.
But they are negotiating with developers as we speak, and
There are-
that's part of it.
Yeah, there are bills before the provincial. There's a bill, I think, right now that is
Even before the bill, there is monies.
Case by case.
Yeah.
well, it's Section 37 agreement.
Section 37.
But that's it. Inclusionary zoning and Section 37 is a part of the Municipal Act where if somebody wants to develop more units than the zoning would allow, they have to give back to the city. And the city often uses that money to create parks and create housing. They do a lot with that money. So that's different from inclusionary zoning, but it is a benefit. And how does this community get a piece of that benefit is the question.
What is this inclusionary zoning? What does it mean? That poor cannot be included with
No.
well off or what?
No, it effectively means that for developers the city effectively puts a tax on development. And tax is a dirty word, but effectively it's if you want to develop in any municipality, if the municipality would pass the bylaws, they would say that if you develop a 100-unit building, maybe 5 or 10% of it has to go to a social benefit, where
And it doesn't exist now in Toronto.
It doesn't exist now in Toronto because legislatively, the province would have to give the municipalities the authority to do that, and currently they do not have the authority to do that.
Won't John Tory think about poverty in Toronto?
I can't speak for the mayor, but there is a bill before Parliament, before the provincial Parliament right now, it's gone a number of times and it's been defeated at the provincial level. So I'm not sure why. Again, you can talk to your engineers. It's a good idea. We recommend.
Doesn't the city currently now, through Section 37 and other deals that they're making, either in terms of deferring the development tax, things are happening now that a certain number of units, for example, all the parapet units, a portion of those apartments went for the parapet.
That's right.
And then they're now being released, and some of those are going into the housing stock.
Affordable housing.
Of affordable housing that the city runs, right? And you go on the list. I have a friend who moved into one of the units as a senior. So it is happening now in a small way. I say let's start small there. You've got the framework there, and then push for the inclusionary zoning, which would mean a certain percentage would have to be made available.
The task force is all behind that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add another ministry to the list. I work for Safe Haven and we support children. And one of the big issues for our families is the transition into adult services and housing in Wawayuwa. So the Ministry of Children and Youth Services should be included on this.
For sure. And this was another ministry to the list for interministerial cooperation, children and community. Children and Youth Services, and one of the proposals we actually recommended that was funded by the ministry dealt even specifically with the transitional age youth group. One of the transitions that came up as a question or as an issue before. So, yeah, we're not going to miss anybody in this process. It's a long list, and it should be a long list. Exactly. I hate to interrupt tonight, and I don't mean to stop things. I've forewarned everybody out there that I had to leave a few minutes after 6 for another event. So I'm gonna. We may well be close to an end for questions anyway. But in the meantime, leaving Leslie and Bonnie here to very helpfully and effectively answer any other questions that come up. Just for the moment, from me, and I think on all of our behalfs, thank you for both listening and for some really interesting questions and suggestions. we weren't kidding about the importance of communication to us and hearing from you and taking careful notes here. And there'll certainly be opportunities as well. Bonnie will probably mention this at the very end about written feedback to us, Facebook feedback to us, following up on some of the things that have come up in the conversation today. So thank you very much.
So we can continue answering questions.
Just a quick question. What's an entity for putting in a proposal?
Good question. Guess who gave us that? That was the legal people at the ministry.
Yeah.
It's an organization. What's a synonym for entity?
Group organization.
A group or organization, yes, that has legal standing. And this was required by the ministry because all funds have to flow to some legal organization, right?
So does that mean it's required to be not-for-profit in terms of an entity, or?
No, I don't. To this date, it has. I don't think it came up as a specific issue, but I think the general presumption would be no. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be not for profit. In this community, in this sector, I think the overwhelming number of proposals will come from what could be called not for profit.
Sorry, I said I was going to stop answering.
Yep. I don't know if you want to.
I have a question about the current system, the way the waiting lists are dealt with. I mean, I'm encouraged that the task force is doing this job, but I don't think the way the wait list works now is current. For example, in a few of our situations, our kids have been on a wait list for a placement, and we don't want a placement. We want support funding. And that those decisions are made by a table of people who provide traditional supports. Right. So, but really we want support dollars, but we're caught in a catch-22. And the way the system works now is really not in line with the rights of citizens. You know, you're waiting for a placement, and kids or adults could be, put in another town, or, could be moved away from where they grew up. And for families like ours who have been involved in the integration and inclusion movement for years, we want our children to have a home, and we don't want them to be seen as welfare. So the current system, is placing them, and that's not even in line with what their rights should be. So is the task force going to try and get to the root of the problem? Because I think that you're doing great, and I think there are some good projects that are funded, but it's just on the surface. We have to get underneath and change the whole philosophy. Can you do that?
Okay, so the question was about the wait list and the DSO and getting individualized dollars rather than placements in a group home or whatever. So our job is not to change the DSO, okay? And as everybody calls it a wait list, it's not a wait list, it's a crisis list. So you don't, like a wait list would be, okay, you go up, and then you finally reach the top, you get called. Well, that's not how it works. You can be at the top for 5 years, and if people go in crisis, they get the position first. But there is also, when you talk to the DSO and you want individualized dollars, there is a check mark for that, right? There's group homes, there's still, and there's they keep changing the name of it. That's why I always right.
DSO doesn't deal with residential. Like, we're very involved in our area, and they only do community participation supports. It's not a pot of money that deals with residential.
Right, because there is no pot of money. At this moment, there isn't.
There is tradition.
Right. But if you don't check off that check, that's what you want, is individualized funding or independent funding, whatever the current name of it is. they'll never call you if a pot of money comes up, right? I only know of 2 times they've ever called for that. So what you do is you put in a proposal when the call comes. This is how we want to run our home on individualized funding, right? They look at it, you get granted or you don't get granted.
And who do you do that?
Well, at this moment, there's nobody.
There's nobody.
There's nobody.
But the DSO in our area has told us that they cannot deal with residential funding. That's what we were told. They can't deal with residential funding.
Then go to your MPP. I'm sorry to keep going on this, but go to them and say that this is what I've been told. I mean that.
But I don't believe it's the DSO. It's the ministry that has directed them.
No, because I addressed them on this topic. It's currently, and I guess I get their thinking, there's no money for this, right? So it's currently, it's not available because there's no money. But if they don't allow people to tick off that check mark and money comes available, you will not be advised of it, right? So whether there's money or no money or never will be money, that's not the point. Tell them I want that checked off, right? And whether I know there's no money at this time, there's no funding, and we don't know when it will ever come, but I want that checked off.
But to answer your initial question, it's not within the scope of this task force to advise on waiting lists.
So I'm just wondering, can you influence that? Because nothing's going to really change if you don't get to the root of the problem.
Unfortunately,
and I was told that legislation wouldn't allow for direct funding. That's the answer I was getting. So
it's individualized, right? And it has to go through an agency.
Yes.
At the current.
But they're saying even allowing that. It's not being allowed. So obviously different stories, etc. But I mean, I hear your frustration. I think we have to participate in a system that's fraudulent from the get-go. That's the problem.
The scope of our work did not include that, and it was quite specific. It said, your role is not to comment or advise on waiting lists or the services. It is to look at new and innovative solutions to housing. So, unfortunately, that's we can't take on that role. Scope creep is a big thing for our committee, and we have to be very careful not to try to. We have a very narrow scope that's been assigned to us.
But you did say you were advocating, so
within the scope that's
innovative is to give people with developmental disabilities their true status as Canadian citizens and enable them to have a home of their choice with the support they require, and stop making it a placement and a waiting list for that.
We could our scope could become ginormous. It could take on everything's connected, but our role is to focus just here. And I understand what you're.
I'm just putting it
saying.
there.
But it's a good way to count need as well. We're always talking about counting needs, and no one ever asks for desires or what our preference is. So it's good to make sure that there is that box that can be checked off. So even if that could be clarified in any reports you do, that you can't respond if there's no count, if there's no numbers.
Right.
And you won't get it if you don't request it. You won't get it if you don't know what you don't know, if we won't tell you what you don't know.
This is for Bonnie. So last year, I applied for a housing for my daughter. So it's the first time for me to apply for that. And how true is it that within a year, if there is no housing placement for my daughter, I'm going to close the application and then I will reapply again? Is that true?
Not that I've heard. I'm not talking, I mean, we don't deal with that on the task force.
This is from the DSO because I was referred to them and then they referred me to
everything has to go through the DSO, right?
Yeah, so I have to reapply.
So neither Bonnie nor I work for the Ministry of Community and Social Services or for the DSO.
Go through DSO and ask.
Okay, I'm going to try to make myself clearer here. I think you said, and I read prior to coming here, that you said that you were very interested in interministerial help and communication on this issue. Is that correct?
Yep.
Correct.
It is correct, okay. Who defines the mandate of
Well, I'm not in, I would suggest, or I would guess, the cabinet board, the cabinet of the provincial government would define the role of each minister. I mean.
Yeah, I'm wondering why this lady mentioned that in the 1980s, all the ministries said they would be involved in housing our children. They would. They said they would. They mandated themselves to do it, and it didn't happen. So how is it? That's why I was talking about legislation earlier. How is it going to happen when you can say, well, we'll do it, and then you don't?
Because there's no feedback or accountability.
I mean, I'm trying to find a way in which it would be forced to happen.
I'm not sure that that's something that the Housing Task Force is involved in, so I think.
Now that's being outside the scope of our mandate is not a mantra that we embrace. We recognize that there is frustration and we share it. But the provincial government also recognizes that some of its ministries and some of their business are in silos, and it would benefit all to break down some of those silos and recognize the interconnectedness of services for citizens. And there are great efforts going forward to do that, and we are a very small part of that.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, because I was so excited when I read that. I thought to me, it was a really new and exciting idea, and they seem to be dying before my very eyes as I sit here. But you're saying there are efforts to push this forward.
Currently.
Yeah.
Okay. And I forgive you for being limited by the
We're coming close to the end now. It's 6:25. Just one more question. So.
Okay, this is a practical question. All the learning that takes place through these proposals that have been accepted, how are we going to be able to reach that, to get those reports or whatever it is?
To see creative, innovative projects.
I'm thinking especially there's one project that's very practical about creating trusts, templates for creating trusts.
Yes,
So
if
I'm interested in finding out what the template is, where am I going to go?
Well, yeah, sure, but we intend to produce an interim report. We're at the middle of our mandate, what we've done to date, but we also intend to produce a final report, which our intent of the task force was to solicit innovative housing solutions, evaluate them, and make recommendations to the province that these ones we found of value, and they actually produced something that was innovative. And that report will be public, and you'll discover it there. We will evaluate all the projects that we fund against criteria of whether it delivered what it thought and what we think it should deliver. At that point, we make recommendations. We're hoping that if there are some truly innovative solutions, that they can be replicated throughout the province and new funding will be assigned to it. But there will be a report on all of these successful projects.
Or contact us.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Is there a possibility for the projects that didn't get funded to create a template, so just a summary of what the idea is with contact information? So and we could have all of those on connectability.
The ones that didn't get funded?
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah, so it's really the ideas, right? So if people have ideas, getting the essence of those ideas, and with a contact person, an email or something like that, so that if people wanted to find out more about them.
We can. We'll take that back. We'll take that back to the task
We
force.
probably have to get the okay from people putting in the proposal, but and in fact maybe sending them a
feedback
sheet or a template that they could fill out and submit it back, and then we can put all of goes on connectivity.
It's a good learning for the second phase. We can actually build that into the RFP and say, do you? Yeah, it's good.
It's a great idea because people used to talk about micro boards, and damn if I can find anyone to talk about it. Everyone talks about it. There's no meaningful contact name or people in that call.
If you go on the Facebook, there is, for the Housing Task Force, one lady did it.
That's right.
Yes, and she put all her,
Oh, she did?
yeah, it's all on there, so if, you have to go back a
That's why I
little.
was asking the question about the entity that needed to be micro board in order to apply. Good idea.
Did you want to, that's the other questions, did you want to say anything in conclusion, or is there?
Obviously you're all interested or you wouldn't be here, so there are many ways of getting in contact with us. I really truly recommend the Facebook page. I recommend going on Connectability. It's got the Facebook page connection, it's got the email connection, and it's got information on there. If there's certain information you're looking for, send the task force an email and then we can put it on there. We're kind of discovering this process through, right? So we're putting what our ideas are, but if you want a certain document on there or so that you can reference it, let us know and we'll get it up there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.